The joy that is above joy is the joy of living free of fear. To be free of fear is ecstasy. William James, who has been called the father of American psychology, said that the most important discovery of the 20th century was that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. And it's true. I can tell you that the greatest discovery that I've made in my life is that by changing how I think and feel inside myself, that I can change anything and everything that exists in my world. It is the most remarkable discovery. And what this discovery does for the person who is willing to take it to heart and to really learn what it truly means is that you suddenly become no longer a victim, but you become victorious. There is nothing that beyond that point can control your life. One of the primary responsibilities in life is to face and erase our fear. In fact, to annihilate fear. We have come to think that fear is so natural, it's such an important part of our contemporary lives that we have considered it to be us. And it really isn't us. Fear must come to have a new function in our lives. It must have a new and very important service or end, a new meaning that it is leading us toward. Last week in our class I shared with you the concept that the two primitive emotions, fear and anger, served the human race as it was evolving, as it was unfolding. And I said served the race, it actually saved the race. Fear, the primitive emotion which caused early man to flee in the face of danger. And you have to remember that the world was a much more dangerous place then than it is now. And when cornered, anger gave early man the ability to fight. So to flee or to fight is what saved us. But these primitive emotions have taken us as far as they can take us. And now each one of us has reached the point in our own evolution where fear and anger must serve us in a new way. And in fact, they must become stepping stones to our spiritual nature. Before I really get into the subject this evening, I want to remind you that if you show me a frightened person, and I'm looking at a room filled with frightened people, I'll show you an angry person, and oftentimes an accusatory person. Because fear and anger are always outer-oriented, and fear and anger are always causing us to react to the world as though it threatens us. That's what fear and anger were created to do. But people who constantly react to their lives from the normal, natural, external stimuli that comes to us never learn to live. Those persons never, ever have control. They're always the victim of circumstances or conditions. When a person is in an angry reaction, they are reacting from the fear of their own inadequacy to handle the situation. And when I'm unafraid, I don't have to react. I can act or feel or love or be the person that I was created to be. In her really outstanding book, Feel the Fear and Do It, Susan Jeffers wrote that fear can be broken down into three basic levels, and the first is the surface level. Level one fears are event or circumstance oriented. For example, there are those fears that just happen. The stimuli just happen, such as aging. Everybody gets older, hopefully. But the process of getting older arouses or causes a great many people to be afraid. The fear of becoming disabled, the fear of retirement, of being alone, of children leaving home, of the loss of financial security. That is a fear that so many people have. As a matter of fact, today I was talking to a woman who had been quite well fixed, and she turned her financial affairs over to a person just a few years ago, and just recently, within the last 2 weeks, has discovered that all of her resources are gone, and she is in her late 60s. The fear that she was experiencing, I simply cannot describe to you. And there was an accompanying anger, resentment. The loss of her financial security was a disaster, but the negative emotions that that loss had engendered was and is really destroying this person's capacity to live. She really can't do anything about what has happened to her finances, but there are some things that she can do about her responses that can give her life back to her again. The fear of change. Isn't it startling that we pray for change, and then when it comes, we fear it. We resist it when it comes. We're down on our knees praying, oh God, make it other than it is, but don't change anything. The fear of accidents, the fear of rape. And there are those fears also that require action on our part. They're not things that happen, they're things that we do. Like, for example, going back to school. You didn't graduate. Making decisions. Most people's lives are crystallized because of their fear of making decisions. With many people, it is virtually impossible for them to make a decision. They simply won't decide because of their fear of what will happen if they make a choice. Ending or beginning a friendship. The fear of using the telephone. The fear of driving. These fears are all acquired. No one was ever born with the fear of driving. And particularly driving at night. Oftentimes I'll speak to someone and I'll say, I'll see you Wednesday night. No, I won't be there. Why? Well, it's because. I said, it's because you're afraid. That's why. And the answer always comes back, yes, I'm afraid of driving at night. That's a fear that can be so easily overcome if one can see how restrictive fear is for us. And the fear that is worse than the fear of death. You know what it is? There's one fear that's stronger than the fear of death. How many of you know what it is? What is it? Public speaking. All of you knew it. And you know, oftentimes it's not the fear of standing before a group like this. Speaking to one person in public is public speaking, and how many times have we just put our little heads down and walked by and we just wouldn't express ourselves at all? I can remember when I first joined the 12-step group many years ago and went to an open meeting. And I knew for certain that you would never, ever get me up on a platform like this. I knew it. My heart, just thinking about it, caused my heart to pound. And here I am, speaking. The fear of making a mistake. And another fear that is so powerful, the fear of intimacy. I'm not talking about the fear of sex. I'm talking about the fear of intimacy. People are afraid to be intimate. And lots of times here in this building, I can tell the new people when they first arrive at the close of a service when we stand and hold hands. I mean, how did you feel the first time you were here and someone grabbed your hand on either side? You probably went just like this. One of the insidious qualities of fear is that it tends to permeate other areas of our lives. For example, if you fear making new friends, it then stands to reason that you also fear going to parties, having intimate relationships, applying for jobs, and on and on and on. Fear doesn't quit. It never lets us go. The level 2 group of fears are not situation-oriented. They are ego-oriented. The fear of rejection. Someone handed me a poem today, Gail Boynton. It never happens without my thinking of it first. You focused on what I don't want, I'm bound to see the worst. I see it, then I get it. Not the other way around. My thoughts create experiences that sneak up with no sound. I dreamed you might be thinking of me leaving me behind. Now I'm left alone with my thoughts inside my mind. So if I'm not satisfied with how it came about, I simply need to look within and to see what is without. First within and then without is the universal order of things. And that which we fearfully anticipate, we actually create. The fear of being lied to, fear of being conned, fear of helplessness, and the fear of the loss of self-esteem in other person's eyes. Such a fear. What will you think of me? What do you think of me? How many of us have spent our lives seeking the approval of other persons, actually being paralyzed in our conversation because every time we spoke we were hoping to say something that would gain their approval? Have you ever been afflicted with that fear? Of course you have. Level 3 fear is simply based on one underlying statement: I can't handle it. At the bottom of every one of your fears is simply the fear that you can't handle whatever life might bring you. But the truth is that if you knew that you could handle everything that came your way, what could you possibly fear? Suppose you knew for certain that every moment of your life, no matter where you were or what you were doing, you were going to be totally adequate for the occasion. Suppose you knew that. Suppose you were certain of it, and suppose you had proven it to yourself all day long today and yesterday and throughout this past week. That no matter what is happening to you, you are totally capable of responding more than adequately to the events that occur. Would you like to live that way? Well, that's what these 4 lessons are about, and it's what I hope to have each one of us experience, because nothing is real until we can prove it in our own lives. So I want you to listen to the material that I'm sharing with you, not just intellectually, but from the perspective of your own experience, of your own world, of the events that are taking place, and of the things that have frightened you and have locked you into the comfort zone in which you find yourself. All that you have to do to diminish your fear is to develop more trust in your ability to handle whatever comes your way. And it's possible to achieve this level of accomplishment and of understanding. But not by ourselves, and that's one of the principles that we must remember. Notice how much easier it is tonight in this room of almost 1,000 people to casually, almost joyously admit that you are afraid. As a matter of fact, let's prove it to ourselves. All of you who have known fear recently, like very recently, and have let fear dominate certain areas of your life, raise your hand. Isn't that astonishing? It's amazing. And nobody had a heart attack when you said that. Do you know, in that moment you took one giant step forward into a whole new dimension of freedom from fear? One of the most important steps that we must take is to take away the shame of fear and to get behind fear's denial. Let me read a statement for you from the book of 2 Timothy, the 1st chapter, beginning with the 6th verse. It's Paul talking to a young man who had learned to practice spiritual principles in every corner of his life as a result of the understanding and the faith of his mother and his grandmother. And that was Timothy. And of course Paul played a very important role in Timothy's life. And Paul said to Timothy about his life and about his faith in God, "This being so, I want to remind you, Timothy, to stir into flame the strength and boldness that is in you, that entered into you when I laid my hands upon your head and blessed you." And that last statement I will share with you in more detail next week. This concept that we are not going to make it by ourselves, that we need each other to get where we want to go. But Paul is saying, stir into flame. Stir up the excitement. I mean, like, stir it up. I mean, like, get it going. Like there's this incredible energy in you that your fear has diminished. Fear keeps you crystallized and quiet inside and withdrawn and immobilized. It won't let you move. It won't let you think. It'll paralyze your mind and your body. And Paul is saying, stir up that flame. The strength and boldness that is in you, it is there. Do you know that there's a strength and boldness in you? Do you know that? It's there. It has always been there, and it always will be there. But you must stir it up. You must call it forth. And where do you call it forth? In the events of your life, in the circumstances of your life. You call it forth to do the thing that needs to be done by you when otherwise you would be so paralyzed with fear that you would not do it. But you wouldn't say that I'm afraid. You would say, well, I don't want to. That's what we say when we're afraid. I don't want to do that. You can't make me do that. Who do you think you are? Instead of saying, I'm scared to death, help me. Stir up that flame. For the Holy Spirit, God's gift, does not want you to be afraid of people, but to be wise and strong and to love them and to enjoy being with them. Do you think that Timothy was an agoraphobic? Of course he was. I mean, Paul is talking to an agoraphobic and saying, you're scared to death, Timothy, but it's not God's choice, it's yours. If you will stir up this inner power, you will never be afraid. Never be afraid? Paul is talking about the joy of living without fear, never being afraid. Doing all the things that you need to do fearlessly. And Paul continued, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and love and of self-control, a sound mind. You see, that's the way we're made. This is the way that we're supposed to live. And fear and anger, the two primitive emotions, have locked us into another belief system about ourselves, into old ideas, and have kept us crystallized. Many years ago, when I discovered that simply by changing my thoughts, I could change my life. And by changing my thoughts, I don't just mean that I, Jack Boland, but I discovered that this really is a spiritual universe. And I'm a spiritual being, and that I had within me power to do all the things that I needed to do, and a wisdom that was beyond anything that my intellect understood. When I set out to practice spiritual principles in every area of my life in order to change my life, fear and anger for the first time became major assets. I came to understand that I had to use my fear in a positive, joyous way. Now, not remaining afraid, not getting more afraid so that I could do what I wanted to do, and not becoming more angry so that I could do it, but in this way. I discovered that if I was afraid of anything, I had to do it. And that was so exciting. Why was that exciting? Because I was afraid of everything. I'm not putting you on. I was afraid, period. And when I looked around me in my life, there were so many opportunities to practice putting on that fervor, that spirit, that joy and the excitement. So I had to do everything that I was going to do now fearlessly. And fearlessly meant substituting joy and excitement and enthusiasm for fear. When I awakened in the morning, I got up an hour earlier to practice in my mind how the day was going to be, to rehearse the day. And to the best of my ability, knowing what my responsibilities were that day, I would rehearse the day and go through the day consciously walking through those events as I believe them to be. Every day changed. Of course, you know, my days never went exactly the way that I thought they were going to go. But I would walk through my days practicing being fearless and excited and joyous. And I'm talking about exaggeratedly fearless. I acted my way. I danced my way. I leaped my way through my day in my mind. Sometimes it was so ridiculous the way that I did it, it was embarrassing. I was just embarrassed by what I was doing. But I knew that if I was going to change my outer world, I had to change my inner state of being. The moment I became angry about something, I had to look for fear behind the anger. Remember that I said, if you show me a frightened person, I'll show you an angry person? And if I was angry or upset, I had to substitute joy or love for anger. I had to love the person that I was upset at. Now, if that won't just curl your hair, I'll tell you. But who was I doing it for? I was doing it for me. The way I had lived my life had not worked, and it never would work. And I did not want to live my life, the rest of my life, the way that I had lived my life. And I knew that this way worked, and it did. It did. I practiced making calls on some of the raunchiest purchasing agents that you've ever met in your life. I mean, they were good at just pounding on people like me. And I would sit in the outer office and practice walking in so intelligent and so sweet and just really, you know, I had my sales pitch all ready to speak. And sometimes I'd walk in that door and my heart would be pounding. But the more I practiced and rehearsed, the more it began to be that way. This stuff really works. Very important technique that I discovered. I want to share it with you because it will change your life. If you're a frightened person, you must hear what I'm saying to you. In every instant of fear, and at this moment, select an area of your life in which you're presently experiencing a lot of fear. And I want you to rehearse the worst case scenario. I'll tell you about the first case scenario in a moment, but the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that could possibly happen to you if you face your fear? I can tell you immediately that your fear does not want you to face the worst case scenario. It will do everything to get you, to keep you from doing it. But describe to yourself, define to yourself, what is the worst thing that can happen? And in your imagination, practice having it happen, and then walk right up to your fear in that worst case scenario and face your fear, and you'll make a remarkable discovery that the worst case scenario and your fear are two separate things. So you're not afraid of the worst thing that can happen to you. You're not. You think you are, but you're not. You're afraid of fear. It's the fear of fear. If you will look your fear straight in the eye, in your mind, if you'll walk right up to it, it will begin to disappear. Your fear cannot bear having you discover it and look at it. Can't. It won't. Facing fear is the certain death of fear. It's a fact. It's a fact. The part of you that will face your fear is the spiritual part of you. The part of you that will walk up to and experience the worst case scenario is your spiritual self, in which there is no fear. For God has not given you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and of love, which is joy, and of a sound mind, a whole mind. It is already yours. Let me give you an example that I went through. I've been through this worst case scenario many, many hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times over the years. It was 1981. We moved into this building on the first Sunday of June of that year. And early in July, 1 month later, I discovered that I had a life-threatening carcinoma that had metastasized into the lymph system of the left side of my face. That surgery was necessary, should be performed immediately, and the prognosis for recovery was very poor. And this was by the physicians at University of Michigan Hospital. Was I afraid? Only briefly. Because I looked at the worst case scenario. I have died in the past, and so the fear of death really is not something that I have to deal with much anymore. I was not afraid of dying, but I was afraid of leaving you with this building unpaid for. Crossed my heart, I was. And that was the fear of the ego, of course. I think you could have paid for it, but I didn't believe you could. And some other people didn't believe they could either, so they didn't want me to die for several reasons. One was they liked me. And I went to the worst case scenario, that I would die as a result of that cancer. I didn't believe that I would, but I faced the fact that I might. And I decided that if I did, I was going to enjoy every moment of the experience, including going into surgery and coming out of surgery and the days that were left to me. And I walked through that experience joyously. And so my spiritual actions for recovery were not based on not trying to die. You see, not trying to die creates fear. Does not keep us from it. You have to accept the fact that you're going to die someday anyhow. I mean, we're all going to. You know, just being alive is fatal. How many people do you know that are over 150 years old? Came through the surgery, except 2 accidents occurred in the surgery. One was a serious damage to the facial nerve on the left side of my face, and my face was totally paralyzed. And damage to the nerve that controls the left vocal cord, and my left vocal cord was paralyzed. And here am I, a minister, on this platform with a paralyzed face. I couldn't even whistle. I couldn't pucker my lips, and I had no voice. Was I afraid? Absolutely. I was scared. And I went into the chapel at the University of Michigan Hospital, and I went in there with tears just streaming down my face, and I said, oh God, what am I to do? What am I to do? And the voice spoke to me and said, I have not brought you this far to not take you the rest of the way. And something like, I have not given you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love and of power and of a sound mind. And my instructions were these, that this experience was my opportunity to practice these principles that I have been talking about. To practice seeing and visualizing that I would live, that incidentally, not only was my face paralyzed and my voice paralyzed, but they were not sure that they had all the cancer either. And so the prognosis was still not very good. It was the most wonderful opportunity to live a moment to moment with joy that I've ever had. Do you know that I right now can look back with such clarity and recapture special, glorious moments in those days and weeks that followed? Living in now moments. Knowing, practicing. I would get up in the middle of the night and practice the presence of God. In my whole life, I've never worked as hard is not the right word, as joyously at taking charge of my mind. Unless you and I are faced with death, we're not going to make much effort to control our mind. We will hope that something happens, but we're not going to really get down into the trenches of our minds and do the work that needs to be done. And I can tell you that fear is death. You may not die, but your life is dead. If you remain afraid the way that the world is afraid, you are dead. You have no real life. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Of course you do. Of course you do. And so to see and to know that the most important thing that you'll ever do is make a concentrated effort now to overcome fear. Period. But fear in all of the forms in which fear happens to you. Why should we have to struggle? Why should we have to struggle as human beings? You recall the story of the butterfly that was emerging from the cocoon. And a gentle person wanted to help and pulled back the cocoon so that the butterfly could easily escape. But that butterfly was never able to use its wings. You are just a different kind of butterfly. You are a former caterpillar who is emerging. You are a spiritual being discovering your spiritual wings, discovering spiritual principles, and life is so contrived that you must face your fears and your anger, the negatives in your life, and overcome what appears to be the adversity that is there, which is really not adversity at all. Because the moment that you begin to face your fear and go into action to overcome one fear, magic happens. I promise you that magic will always happen. Face a fear, and the death of fear is certain, but much more than that will happen to you. Everyone has a typical series of constantly reoccurring emotional states, from the greatest excitement to the most depressed, morbid, and frightened feeling. Would you agree that that is true? In our normal human condition, we go round and round those emotional states. Now, the problem is that we take those emotional states as being real. We believe in them. We trust those emotional states. And we should never trust them at all. We should never trust them. Let me give you an example. You're having a great day, a wonderful day. You turn on your radio, and there's a song. That song. You know the one I'm talking about? You know the one I'm talking about. And suddenly, what happens to your great day? It's gone. It's shattered. And you're back into old memories. You're back into old fears. You're back into the rejection of the past. You're back into your dependency syndrome, right? Your codependency responses to life. Are those emotions real? Not at all. They can be changed. And they must be changed. But they cannot be changed unless you can see them, unless you can begin to use them. And this is why that seeing your fears and your anger is so important. In those early days of my recovery, I can tell you that I would take myself with the back of the neck and the seat of the pants, and the moment that I found myself afraid, I would stop in my tracks. I'd get a smile on my face and a song in my heart, and I would just march into the things that I feared. And if I found myself upset or angry, I would take myself with the back of the neck and the seat of the pants, and I would take a deep breath, and sometimes it would take several deep breaths because I could lose my temper more times before 9 o'clock than a normal person could in a week. And I would put on love. And I would put myself in the position of the other person. What's the last thing you ever want to do? Put yourself in another person's position when you don't like them. And forgive them. And I would wish them the very best. It was revolting. But but it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. It wasn't normal. But you're not here to be normal. Normalcy will kill you. It'll absolutely, it's death. Because there's more to you than normalcy. I make a lot of calls from my car phone because I can't get to all my phone calls here at the office. And I was driving home one day this week, and I was speaking to a recovering agoraphobic. You know what an agoraphobic is? A person who has lived a life of fear. We'd only been talking a couple of minutes, and I suddenly heard a squeal or a scream. There was a reaction on her part, on the other end of the phone, and I could actually feel it. And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "There's a Siamese cat looking in the window, and its yellow eyes are glowing." And I'm sure that to her, the eyes were glowing in the dark. And there was fear. And I said to her, "The cat won't hurt you." And she said something like, "It already has. I mean, it's there." That's bad enough. All kinds of things were occurring. And I said, "Why are you afraid of a Siamese cat?" And she said, "One attacked me when I was a child." And I said, "Tell me the rest of the story." And she said, "Well, I was in a basement, and this cat attacked me and jumped on me and bit my neck and clawed my neck and would not let me out of the basement, and I was there terrified." And I said, "By chance, was there a litter of kittens in the basement?" And she said, "Yes." "But what does that have to do with it?" And I said, "By chance, were you over picking up one of the kittens when the cat attacked?" And she said, "Yes." And she went through and reconstructed the experience from an adult point of view. Our fears are acquired. And we can release them. We can rehearse them from our present point of view. I can tell you that every one of us has a Siamese cat looking through a window in some form in our life. You know what I'm talking about? I've said many times, if you are afraid that there's going to be somebody under your bed when you get home at night, and you keep looking long enough, there'll be two eyes looking back one day when you... And it won't be a Siamese cat. You've heard me tell the story, but it bears repeating. of why we were not on television and radio in our old church. And as a matter of fact, it's why we're on radio and television today, and doing quite well at it, incidentally. In our old church at Coram and Queen, we had overflow crowds on Wednesdays and Sundays, just like we do here. And at this particular time in our experience, there were several young men and women who were in the media who came to me from time to time and said, "Jack, why aren't we on radio? Why aren't we on television?" And I always gave them the same wonderful, real, true answer. I don't have time. But we'll get around to it someday. You know, someday just puts everything on the back burner, doesn't it? They kept talking to me about it, and one night they came and attacked me. 4 of them came into my office and said, "Why aren't we on television?" And so I gave them the same story. But on the way home that night, I was not so comfortable with my answer, although it was the same answer. And coming back to my office the next day, I just about drove the car off the road laughing. I saw why we weren't on radio or television. You'll never guess why. I'm scared to death. And I remembered that it went back to a time in my childhood when I was about 12 years old, and I won the spelling bee in my school, my grade school. I was a great speller. And then I went to there were several schools, and I won that one. And then there were down to 2 of us, but this time it was not done in school, it was done at radio station WDBJ in Roanoke, Virginia. Why do I remember WDBJ? Because I was scared. And the little girl who was on the other side, it was just the 2 of us, she came there to spell. I came there to be afraid. And I was paralyzed. Whatever the word was, and I don't remember, I knew how to spell it. I knew how to spell that word. And I missed it, and she won. And my mind said, "Let me get out of this studio, and you'll never get me back into one of these things again." There was a Siamese cat in my mind. You've got one. It is the most interesting thing that morning I decided to be on television. And so help me, this is the truth. In less than a week, in no more than 5 days, I received a telephone call from one of the local television stations asking me to come and be a panelist. No one had ever called me before. I wonder if my decision to face my fear and be on television had anything to do with it. Do you wonder? Don't wonder. The moment that you face your fear and go into action, the moment that you laugh at it, the moment that you face the worst case scenario and walk into that situation, and that's what I did that morning. I visualized myself being on television, and I was scared, but I did it. And the call came. The whole universe responds to that person who is willing to face his or her fears. A transformation takes place. There's a different order of things that occur. And so you see, we're not just giving up lowly fears so that we can live comfortably at our present level. I'm talking about a way of life that will continue to transform you all the days of your life, because as long as you live, you're going to be finding things that you have still not faced or eradicated. And it becomes so exciting. W.C. Fields, the great comedian, became a rich man. He was worried sick that swindlers might take his money from him. And so what he did was to put his wealth in over 200 banks in this country and different parts of the world under assumed names. And when he died, the executors of his estate were able to trace only 45 of those bank accounts. His family lost many, many millions of dollars, an unknown number of millions of dollars that were never recovered because of his fear. What he feared came upon him, but he swindled himself. That's what fear will do to you. It will rob you. That which I greatly fear has come upon me. But wait a moment. Let me face my fear. And I will be rewarded gloriously, abundantly, magnificently, above my ability to believe, in fact. I want to share with you a letter that I received today from one of you. And Sandy says that she's been here for 4 years and walked into this church with an immense problem and overcame that problem and many others since she has been here. And during these 4 years, she's worked hard on her spiritual life and overcoming many problem areas. But the area that she's working on now is facing her fears. She said, I've overcome so many fears, such as my fear of losing a loved one to death, my own death, talking in front of people, eating in restaurants alone, changing jobs, fear of the future, and the fear of water. I couldn't wash my hair in the shower because I would hyperventilate if water was anywhere near my face. I'm proud to say that within the past couple of years, I've ridden on the Maid of the Mist at Niagara Falls, gone snorkeling, and taken a cruise, all with the constant prayer, I let go and let God. But this brings me to the point of my letter, my frustration and my disappointment in myself. If I truly believe that all I have to do is to let go and let God, then why can't I move ahead to yet another paralyzing fear, that of driving? In my mind, all the other fears were just between God and me. But with driving, it involves the lives and well-being of everyone else on the road. The self-talk that goes on in my head is what you think about is what you create. If I'm afraid of causing an accident, then that fear will surely manifest itself just that way. Jack, how do I face this fear without my negative thinking causing this very thing to happen? It seems like a catch-22. I feel so angry with myself. Fear and anger going together, did I tell you? Show me a fearful person and the anger will come. I feel so angry with myself because I see it as my faith being so shallow and my God so limited. I know that you'll be able to put this into proper perspective for me, and I will work hard to practice the tools I know you'll pass on to me. And our time is limited, so let me say it. This week, and I'll continue next week, Sandy, what you do is to practice the worst case scenario. All of us drive, or at least we're driven. Isn't that true? If you decide that you're not going to drive, you're going to have to call a cab to get home. So somebody's going to be driving you. And if you're afraid of driving, then you're afraid of driving with someone else. And if you're afraid of driving with someone else, then they really have something to fear because you're going to be telling them, now look straight ahead, don't look to the right. You're driving too fast, watch that curve, watch that bump in the road, watch that. You know how the mind works? We have all had to face the fact that we might have an accident. Have you faced that fact with your driving? If you have, indicate that you have by nodding your head. Of course we have. And we don't go around driving being afraid of having an accident, do you? Because you have faced that fear. And so, Sandy, walk up to this worst case scenario. See it. And you'll discover that it is not the accident that you fear, it is fear itself. Look at your fear. Observe your fear. And it will slowly begin to go away. Facing your fear is the certain death of fear. And not only will it go away, Sandy, but there will be an empowerment that will come. The most incredible feeling of peace and joy, of exhilaration will come to you. I'm not a victim of the world I see. I can elect to change all the thoughts and feelings that hurt. James Thurber said, let us not look back in anger or forward in fear, but let us look around in awareness. Let us look around us in this now moment and feel the joy of it, the peace of it, the beauty of it, and the power of it. I wish you joy. God bless.